So now what they want to do is figure out if this child is eligible and will benefit from cochlear implants. Right now the child only has hearing aids and they're pretty young still, so they're pre-verbal. So we're going to talk about what assessment tools and behaviors you should observe and use to see if this child needs to have cochlear implants. If the child is then deemed a candidate to receive cochlear implants, how would you evaluate them after they received the cochlear implants to see if they're beneficial? And lastly, we're going to address the multicultural bilingual aspect of this question. So to start off, I'm going to go over, so given that this child has received hearing aids and is in the pre-verbal vocal development period, how would we evaluate whether or not this child is receiving sufficient or insufficient benefit from the hearing aids? So this is the first part of the question. We just want to see if they're getting anything from the hearing aids and if they are, what it is. That way when they go to a cochlear implant, we can see if it's going to be beneficial, if they even need it, if they should just stick with hearing aids, or if there's still a part that they're missing. So some articles that we used for this. A really good one was the clinical assessment of speech perception. So I think when we answer these comps question, it's not going to be exactly identical. So this article has a lot of references that if you want something more specific to how you want to explain something, you can go to and just find the article that you feel gives you that extra boost. The big one that I used was actually from the Cochlear Implant Hope website, and so it was really straightforward. Some assessment measures that you can look at. Because they're pre-verbal still, you're going to look at their speech perception and not what they're vocalizing because they're pre-vocal. So some ways you can measure their speech perception is through detection awareness, if they're even hearing if someone's addressing them, speaking to them, if they're detecting any sound, if they're localizing sound. Pattern perception, if they can distinguish between CV, CV2, or whatever they're hearing. Discrimination. If they can tell that two different auditory stimuli are different, so if a cat is meowing and a dog is barking, to see if that comes in differently and if they're perceiving it as different. Identification, recognition, if they're able to point to a picture or something. This is kind of young still, but it's one of the things you could see. If they can point to the dog, you go, where's dog, or where's dad? They can point to dad.
You guys need anything?
Answers.
Comprehension, if they're understanding that when we're speaking, we're relaying information, if they understand just that pattern. So these tests and tasks are scored on a percentage basis. Is not to measure them towards other cochlear implants, like kids or anything. It's just to see where they are in the grand scheme of things, where their development is.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Would this fall in our scope of practice, or is this us collaborating with the audiologist? Because I personally don't feel like I would be able.
That's a good question. I don't know, because it is like speech perception, but then who perceives speech? I don't know. That's a good question.
Okay, just a thought.
I think early on, anyways, the whole thing with cochlear implants and when a child has hearing loss, it's a super collaborative approach with a bunch of other therapists and professionals. So I think along the lines you're going to maybe, if not get that information and perceive it and interpret it, you're going to be getting that information and then helping someone else interpret it.
Yeah, I think our role would be to interpret what it means and their language pre-vocal abilities, while the audiologist will determine if they're being able to perceive it or not.
Okay. And it also depends on the means, like how you're getting that information, because if it's a test that we're deemed to administer, then we would be the ones that would give that test, of course, or that tool. But if it's using an audiometer and all these different things, then of course it's more acoustical, so then that would fall on the audiologist. So I think it depends on the tools, which Chris will talk about next.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I remember Keith saying most audiologists aren't like him, aren't clinical audiologists, and most just do the diagnostic testing stuff. So, I don't know, he made it sound like this type of stuff is what we would do, and then sometimes audiologists would do, but a lot of times they choose not to do this type of thing anyway.
I'm sorry, what would be the difference between one of these perception tests and a diagnostic test?
Well, in the audiometer booth with the headphones and stuff. That's what I meant.
Play-based.
That type of test, yeah.
Yeah, like what we do with screenings.
So that's what we would do, or that's what?
No, that's what.
No, the audiologists,
Most
you know, they
audiologists.
stick the kids in the booth, or they would do like the ABR stuff, or the OAE, and all those tests, but then we would do more of the
Like
play
behavioral, these are
Yeah.
like behavioral observations that we're
Oh,
looking
okay.
at.
So, last thing to mention is do the perception assessment in the appropriate language. Don't just go in there and use a language they've never heard because obviously going to skew results. And another thing you can use is Save It R. And I'm not going to touch on that a lot because Eddie and Chris are both going to go into it.
Mhm. And I can talk about it here a little bit,
Here's talk about it
right here,
if you want.
or later. I don't know. Okay, I'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Okay, this is part of the question. What assessment tools and behaviors would be used to perform this assessment at this stage of development? One, for those of you who are in his class, remember that the midterm had this exact thing on it. And so I looked at my midterm exam, and I had put, you know, the play scales, MacArthur Bates, the communicative checklist thing, and he said, yeah, all those are great. So I kept them in here. So for the pre-linguistic skills are assessed through the frequency of communication attempts, the diversity of these attempts, and participation in communication opportunities. And that comes from this article, Eric Murr et al. 2007. I think that's like the main article that we got our information from for how to answer this question. So that's a good one to look back at a lot. And the author of this article, he and some other people developed the Save It R, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot. So the play scales, and I put the article that goes along with that in our article section. And there's an article about the validity of the MacArthur CDI with children who have cochlear implants. So that's in the reference section as well to look at. I couldn't find anything about the checklist of communicative functions and means with hearing impaired children. I looked for a while, so I don't know. I assume it would. I mean, you can still use it because it's not like it's like giving you a standardized score or anything. So we said she should be emerging into the babbling stage, so an inventory of her available phonemes would be useful information to have. Syllable, shape, and suprasegmental characteristics of her vocalizations. And all this stuff is kind of looked at in the scale for assessing vocal development, the Save It R. And yeah, but what's kind of annoying is that they made this, the Save It R, and then it kind of turned into the CASP or the CASP. So I put in a couple more articles describing the Save It R. That would be useful. The 2007 article is the one that talks about all the stuff you should be doing for the assessment. The 2006 article talks about the Save It R specifically, which is kind of turning into the CASP, and that is in a 2008 article, same author, Etmer. And to make it less confusing, I put the article names that's in the folder in quotation marks. So I don't know, I was getting confused myself at the beginning. And I just found out today that it changed. So
What does CASP stand for?
it is the communicative, no, I don't know, conceptual. I'll look it up in a second. Yeah, sorry. And then oh yeah, and in the articles there's some sections on how you can use the CASP in the clinic, so for like assessment and then also intervention later on. And I put the page number there for everyone to find. And then there's a cool poster about the CASP that kind of just summarizes everything. On the midterm, I think the child was a little bit older. So then Keith said using the SPICE program, because it has like a screener for speech perception would be okay. But then I looked the SPICE program up, and it's used for children 3 to 12, and our child isn't 3 yet, so I don't know if you want to mention that. But if you want to mention something for later on, maybe in intervention, you can bring up the SPICE, and I put in an article about the SPICE, evaluation of the SPICE. The ITMAZE, which is the infant toddler something, I can't remember. That is it's a parent interview that you give to the parent, so it's birth to 3 or something like that, and then it just checks off all these things, and you can evaluate like what type of sounds the child's hearing and when they're vocalizing, stuff like that. The peach is one that he actually wrote on my midterm that is a good one to use. And I found 2 good articles. One just talks about the peach and how you can use it, and then the normative data for the peach. And that's also just an interview thing you can do with the parent. Then I also put a tracking speech perception article that you can look at if you want to find more references there. And then functional auditory measures. It kind of just summarizes a couple different measures that we use with young children who've been implanted or have hearing aids. So hopefully that isn't too confusing.
And I think the basis of like what we're looking at is like